Welcome to the PharmaSource podcast. Today's episode is an interview with Bernardo Estupiñán of Drug Biologics Consulting. Bernardo's career started off in chemistry before moving into contract manufacturing business development, and now works as a consultant, guiding companies who are developing new pharmaceuticals through contract manufacturing. In this interview, we talk about his advice for how to have successful relationships with CDMOs and protect yourself from some of the challenges. Bernardo will be joining us as one of the expert speakers at CDMO Live in June. He'll be sharing a best practice framework for how to manage tech transfers. You can find out more about the event by heading to pharmasource.global/events. To start with, I asked him about his early career in chemistry.
I started working in the biotech space, in the biochemistry space, early on when I was working in academia, and back then I was actually growing the different organisms that I was then looking to use as a source for enzymes that I would then purify and do crystallography and so forth, studies like that. So that work eventually led me over to work for Roche Molecular Systems. At that time, Roche Molecular Systems had acquired an asset from Cedus, which is called PCR, and they had acquired the Amplitag polymerase and several other polymerases that Cedus had developed to start sort of making an entry into the DNA space. Turns out that this was a super critical technology, because today you can't talk about this industry without really mentioning PCR, and often PCR is just an implied term within all that. But what that did is it exposed me to the commercial side of biotech, because at Roche, what we ended up doing is we ended up scaling production of the manufacturing of the different DNA polymerases that we were manufacturing at that time. And so it was a very good time at that stage. And during that time also, I was part of the team that developed what was called Amplitag Gold. And Amplitag Gold is a hot start PCR process, a hot start polymerase. What the hot start polymerase did is it eliminated the background noise generated by normal DNA polymerase activity, because it became only active after the reaction temperature reached a certain temperature, at which point there was an inhibitor to the active side of DNA polymerase that was removed, and then it was able to really amplify the larger fragments of DNA rather than the smaller fragments of DNA. And that breakthrough actually led to what today we call quantitative PCR, because you were able to then link the ability to amplify a DNA copy using reporter indicators that are light activated. So you were able to literally see real-time the amplification of the DNA. Today, when you do your rapid COVID test, it's all based on that technology.
Yeah.
So it was a really great way to get into the biotech space. So
you started as very much on the science side, right, at Roche, as senior scientist for manufacturing. And then as your career developed, then you moved into various different biz dev roles. So at DSM, KBI, Catalent, etc. How did you find that transition from a science role into the commercial side?
Oh, it was great. For me, it's what I had wanted to do. Back then, it was sort of it was chicken and egg, because most companies didn't want to hire somebody without sales experience or business development into business development roles. So it was just a matter of finding the right mix of a company willing to sort of take that, understanding the importance of someone that knows the technical side and translating that into a business opportunity for the company. And so what I end up doing with a lot of these CDMOs that I've worked with has been really that interaction between a technical liaison with potential clients, talking with potential clients about their projects from a technical perspective, but then linking that technical perspective into a business for the companies I was working with.
Now you're consulting under drug biologics consulting, when you're sat with a client and you're sat with the CDMO, having experience on both sides of the table, how does that really help you to steer them through the process?
Yeah, I think a very good example of that was one of the early projects that I was involved with, and this was during my time at DSM, was to talk to the potential client on not so much about just the us wanting to sell the services to them for manufacturing of their antibody, but really understanding what it is that they have developed from a process perspective, in terms of have they looked really at molecule stability? Have they looked at the PI of the molecule to make sure that what they've developed would fit a standard process development and manufacturing? Has the downstream been developed to the point that you can get a very clean product after maybe 2 steps maximum, right? These kinds of concepts, and I think those are important concepts because often in academia, and myself included back then, I would sometimes go through 4, sometimes even 5 steps of purification to get the purified enzyme. Now, in my case, I did that because I was working in enzymology and we wanted to do crystal structure, so I needed a super clean product to do that. But when you translate that into a manufacturing service, it becomes extremely expensive the more downstream steps you put into the process. So typically what most CMOs want to do is at most 3 steps of purification, an affinity, and then two cleanup steps to get to the final product. So it was often looking at that down the road and making sure that what the company has developed would fit that concept.
To paraphrase then, to help them to standardize their product offering, I mean, does that give them more options?
To standardize their process, right? Because really making them understand that the more steps that you include from a service provider, the costlier it's going to be to implement that. And the less likely somebody would want to take on a project that is so complicated, because often a service provider, CMO, I mean, they need turnover. They can't work on projects that are endless going through the same, because they need the facility for other projects. So often was working with them and suggesting areas that they could do or develop that would make their process a little bit more standard to what a CDMO can offer. And also, I mean, quite honestly, is often telling them, listen, I don't think you're ready yet for a CMO. I think you really need to work a little bit more on the development process. And also, one big caveat here, of course, is back then we didn't have the term CDMO, right? Back then we only were called CMOs, contract manufacturing organizations. The reason was because the projects were expected to have already been developed and ready to transfer into manufacturing setting and just adapting it to the manufacturing setting. It's not until soon after that the CDMOs realized that there's a lot of business opportunity in developing processes that fit their facilities. So now this is why today you see CDMO being mentioned everywhere, because everybody's doing development work more so than manufacturing work, because that's very critical. So today, a lot of the early companies are able to leverage the development perspective of a CMO to help them in the project.
What challenges would you say there are typically for a client who's trying to bring a new product into the clinic and into the market? What would you say the main issues are that you'd expect to help them navigate?
Yeah, the biggest challenge is actually money. Right? Perhaps the non-realization of a client that it is costly to develop a biologic product to take that into the clinic. Often they don't realize that how much it's going to cost, and I would often tell them back when I was CMO, but even today, and you need to plan on at least spending between maybe $5 to $8 million today in order to get your project out of the discovery stage and into a format of drug product that allows you to then go into clinic, right? And then of course the clinical studies are completely separate cost, but just that portion of getting your little vial with your product in it, and that being ready to go into a first in human clinical trial.
Yep.
It's how much money you will need, and then also how much time you'll need. I mean, you want to plan at least it taking 2 years. If you can get it done sooner, it's better. But if you can't, you have to be able to bridge the time of development and manufacturing with the time you need in order to get that to the clinical research organization that will perform your clinical studies and so forth. Mm-hmm. So that is a big hurdle. That's a big challenge, right? Is the cost. The other challenge is also the where. Where am I going to manufacture this? You can be a client that's sitting on the West Coast looking to do this project with a service provider that's, say, in Europe. Mm-hmm. You can do that, yes, but you have to realize that you have 9 hours difference between the West Coast and somewhere in Central Europe. That means that for you to have a productive call with that service provider, you got to be up at a early time in order to be able to talk to the person at a late time, and mm-hmm. it really shrinks the availability of when you can talk.
And how important is that? I mean, when you're getting a drug developed, I mean, how often would they need to be on calls together? How close is that relationship as you get up and running?
Yeah, it is very important. One of my early clients actually put it into really good perspective. And he told me, he said, Bernardo, it's like, I have one project that I need to get to the clinic, and this one project is like my baby, right? And when I have a baby and I take my baby to daycare, I want to know everything that happens with my baby when it's at daycare, and I want to see this baby at the end of the day as good, if not better, than when I dropped it off early in the morning. Mm. And that goes day for the next 2 years. And here he was right, because that's exactly what it is, right? You have a small biotech that has one asset, and they're putting all their efforts in this asset. And so they need to make sure that the service provider, the CDMO that's working on this asset, is first of all somebody that they can relate to, mm-hmm. that they can relate to them, that there's an open exchange of information, that there's a lot of transparency, that if I have a question, I get the answer, and if they have a question, they can reach out to me and so forth. This is very important. And so when you then have 9 hour difference, it becomes even more important.
You're not the first person, by the way, who's referred to molecules as babies, which need to then be cared for and nurtured and looked after. How important would you say that size is in terms of finding a contract manufacturer that's the right kind of fit? With that in mind, I mean, someone who's actually going to really take care and really be deeply involved with your business.
Yeah, size is also important. I believe there's just a general tendency by potential clients wanting to work with the biggest and the greatest and the best out there, right? But they sometimes may realize that working with a big service provider may dilute how much one-on-one time they get with them, because I'm a small company. I have one asset in the clinic, and I can only spend $5 million. Is that an attractive client for the big service provider? And of course, everybody's going to say yes. Of course it is. I mean, we we don't discriminate between those who can pay a lot and those who cannot pay a lot. The truth is that you do discriminate against that because service providers are in the business of making money, right? Mm-hmm. So they have to because they're bigger, they have a much bigger spend, they want much greater overhead. So they have to be careful not to bring in everything that comes across their desk, because some of them they're really able to select which is the best fit, which is not the best fit. Is this program robust enough to go not only to phase 1 and phase 2, but could it eventually become a commercial, which is what we want, project, etc. Versus some of the smaller CDMOs that are not large. They're sort of what I would call almost boutique CDMOs. They work at a small scale from 1,000 to 2,000 liters, nothing more than that. They are very focused on doing one thing really good, which is, say, drug substance manufacturing, and then there's other boutique CDMOs that are focused on doing drug product manufacturing really good, and at the end is really working with the client to make the client understand that, yes, while it's nice to work with this big conglomerates, it's not necessarily the right answer for this project if what you're looking to do is to be very engaged and involved in the development of this project. So there has to be a culture fit. There has to be one fit where you as the user, you're able to engage and discuss and talk about the project with your CDMO without a problem. It's almost and this is why you go through this. It's like a dating, right? Because if you engage with the CDMO and you do not get along with the CDMO, you're set for just a really rough relationship in taking this project all the way to completion. Whereas if you early on are able to develop a really good relationship with the CDMO, regardless of what size it is, then that tells you that you both are going to be able to work on this project without a problem.
What about regulatory issues? How do you tend to help your clients steer through that?
Well, everybody thinks they have the silver bullet for whatever it is that they're going after, right? So, which is of course nice, and everybody, most of them have like this vision of, I'm going to go into commercial, and therefore I want to work with a CDMO that has done commercial manufacturing and so forth. That I believe is a big mistake, because between today and when I finally will need that CDMO to take my molecule to commercial, assuming I go that far, there's going to be about probably 7 to 8 years worth of time, and I think we all should realize that a lot changes in 8 years. So therefore, it's very risky to believe that you can plan for eight years ahead of today in terms of where your molecule is going to go. What I tell them is it's important that the CMO that you're working with is able to manufacture your clinical material. That's very important. Most of them, if not all of them, have never gone through regulatory inspection, because the regulatory inspection doesn't kick in until you actually go to commercial manufacturing, right? So what we do is we work under what we call GMP. That means we follow the GMP guidelines that are set by the different regulatory agencies, depending on where that CDMO is at, in order to ensure that the process will ultimately meet the regulatory approval process by the agencies, right? So clients have to know that, because it's their role to make sure that the CDMO adheres to these guidelines. And this is why doing a quality audit of the CMO is very important. And this is also, if you're a small company, you bring in somebody with the regulatory expertise and so forth, and you're looking at that. You're looking at how is the CMO performing? How do they deal with deviations? How do they deal with batch failures? how do they address not meeting specifications? How is the system integrated? How are the people trained? How often do people get turnover within the facility? Which are the critical roles? So this is all really important to meet that requirement that you are able to manufacture under GMP. You do a facility inspection. I mean, things that I've done before, as you go and you grab a door and you just like shake on it to see what happens. Yeah, I mean, does it all of a sudden open when it's supposed to be a restricted access door? If it does, that's a big red flag. You don't want to be there. Is the exit door open with little mouse holes on that connect to the exterior, which means there's potentially a rodent pest or something. Yep. You don't want that. You look at the corners. Are there spider webs in the corners? Things that you see in a facility that, even though they follow GMP, may not really give you that warm and fuzzy feeling that these guys really know what they're doing. And then ultimately also you have to look at it from a communications perspective. Are you able to communicate with them, etc.?
Let's talk about tech transfers then, because that's something which you're going to be speaking about at CDMO Live later this year.
Yeah.
So it'd be great if you could just sort of walk us through some of the steps, some of the best practices that you'd recommend people follow to make it a successful tech transfer.
Yeah, the most important thing of tech transfer is understanding what it is that you're transferring, really, right? There's several types of tech transfer. A tech transfer could be a product that's already being manufactured as a CDMO, and you've already done clinical manufacturing, and you need to transfer that now to a different CDMO.
Yep.
Either because the existing CDMO doesn't have the capacity, or you've lost confidence in the CDMO's ability to perform the services, or you just want to now get ready to go into commercial manufacturing, right? So it's really understanding what is being transferred. A term that's often used in tech transfer is facility fit. Okay. Facility fit is a very important concept, because my process, for instance, could be run in a Sartorius bioreactor, and I'm then transferring this into a facility that doesn't have a Sartorius reactor, but say it has an Accelerix or the Cytiva bioreactor. So does my process fit that transfer? It could be that I'm going from 500 liters to 1,000 liters. Is that scale up going to be a problem at this new facility, and so forth? So this is very important, and part of that facility fit also means the analytical activities that are involved in this tech transfer, because analytical testing is what guides us in terms of what we have to do with the process, right? So if I have robust analytics in one CDMO, I need to make sure that those analytics are just as robust in the new CDMO. Another tech transfer is one where you've finished discovery, you've done the development work, and now you're doing the transfer out of development into manufacturing. That tech transfer can be internal. You can have a CDMO that does the development part, because they're a CDMO, D stands for development, into manufacturing, because M stands for manufacturing. Just because it's within the same facility doesn't mean that it's seamless. So you need to make sure that both sides, the development group as well as the manufacturing group, are interacting correctly at the right time. And what you often see in the transfer of these is these sideways from greater to smaller figures, where it shows the involvement early on development as it's being transferred into manufacturing, to development being less and less involved, and manufacturing being more and more involved as it is finally into manufacturing. So you want to see a CDMO that has a good transfer strategy with that.
On that, do you ever encounter resistance, particularly if it was a CDMO who didn't want to give up the project?
Yeah, there's always a lot of resistance. If it's from one CDMO to another CDMO, for instance, the first CDMO under the contract, they will agree to transfer the activity, right? Because all that process belongs to the client. It doesn't belong to the CDMO. But often it then becomes a question of how open are they to doing that transfer. The transferring of the documentation, that's not a problem because that's ownership of the client. Transfer of materials, it's not a problem. That's ownership of the client. But the transfer of know-how becomes a question, right? Mm-hmm. And then of course on the other hand, the new CDMO, they were able to adapt the new into the new information into their facility. That's not a problem. But they will not want to have a technical person from the other CDMO in their facility.
Yep.
I mean, that's spilling the secrets, right? I mean, you don't have somebody from Pepsi Cola coming and doing a transfer at Coca-Cola.
Yeah.
I mean, that will just never in the world ever happen, right? So you, and this is why it is so critical to make sure that your process and the development of the process and the information is just extremely robust, so that literally anybody could take it and adapt it into the new facility without a problem. And there'll be times where this is not the case. So you end up having to literally reinvent the wheel just to get to the next stage of development.
Now, you wrote recently an interesting article about the whole end-to-end CDMO or CRDMO, CXDMO. And
yeah,
so whether it's even possible to have just one service provider take you through the entire sort of full service end-to-end. And right. I think in your analysis, you sort of showed that certainly from the brief you were looking at, there wasn't actually anyone who could truly deliver an entire project right the way from start to finish.
Correct.
What are your views on that then, on the unicorn of a truly end-to-end CDMO? Do they exist? And if they do, are they the best option versus finding relevant specialists who could work together? What's your take?
I think my take is well summarized in my concluding remark where I paraphrased George Orwell, Animal Farm, where it says that we're all unicorns, except some of us are more unicorns than others. That I think holds today, because end-to-end CDMOs, that's what every CDMO wants to be, right? Mm-hmm. And the reason they want to do that is because when you look at the progression of the acronym went from CMO to CDMO to now CRDMO, CADMO. I coined the CXDMO because more and more service providers are adding capabilities because they want to retain the client. They want to retain that account. They don't want the account to go somewhere else. And early on not early on, but I would say about 10 years ago or so, one of the strategies that we saw was the acceleration of development into clinical manufacturing, where we'd have, say, a antibody. And back then, we would say it takes about 24 months to get from development all the way to first in human release of drug product of this antibody. And the reason we had 24 months is because a lot of the activities were being done sequentially. So when you take your Gantt chart and you start with activity 1, then 2, 3, 4, you add them all up, eventually you get down to 24 months. And that sort of was what we all adjusted to. Slowly, we started knocking it down to 18 months. Then all of a sudden, we start saying, hey, we can get you to the clinic in 12 months. And of course, everybody's eyes just go pop like that. And it's like, wow, we want to do that. And so you had CDMOs promoting this accelerated timelines. But what they were not promoting was the fine print, right? So the fine print was assuming, and then there was like tons of little assumptions in there, right? Assuming that, for instance, the CDMO may not be able to offer drug product manufacturing, right? So it says, well, assuming you can do drug product manufacturing elsewhere. A CDMO, for instance, may not be able to offer master cell banking So therefore this assumes that we're using master cell bank. So all of a sudden this 12-month timeline looked good on paper, but once you start going through the assumptions, you realize that this is really not going to work so well. And turns out that what you have to do is you have to collaborate with several other CDMOs in that 12-month timeline to make sure that you fit within that 12-month timeline. I need to work with CDMO A on doing my master cell banking. That has to be done and in progress so I can use that to do my development work. And then I need to work with CDMO B to do my drug product manufacturing. That needs to be lined up so when my drug substance is completed, they can start filling at risk while I do all the testing and then et cetera, et cetera. Yep. So this all of a sudden that whole concept just it's buyer beware kind of approach. And I think what also happens with that approach is that often you become what we call a master of all trades and a jack of all trades and a master of none. And this is of course also important, because if you're working with vanilla maps, I mean, vanilla maps, the reason they're called vanilla maps, I mean, it fits a box anywhere, it's easy to do. But when you start working with a bispecific or molecule that may be a little bit more difficult, this whole idea of accelerated timelines completely disintegrates, because you need to spend so much time on development. You need to spend a lot of time refining, going back to development, going back and forth until you finally have a robust enough process that you're then able to take into GMP before you go into clinic. And so I think what happens is you as a potential client, you need to sort of determine if going to one of these end-to-end CDMOs is the right choice, or if you're better off going to boutique focused specialized CDMOs that are able to do a robust process that can then transfer it into manufacturing. And you can do that, but you always have to make sure that your timelines are good, that you have decent timelines, that you're not rushing it because you need to get to the market as quickly as possible, or need to get to the clinic as quickly as possible.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense. So we're speaking now, it's mid-January 2024. What are your thoughts on what the rest of this year is going to look like? Are there any particular trends which you think are going to be important?
I think what I see now is finally on the tails of what COVID caused to the industry, right? During COVID, we had a surge of capacity being built to manufacture all these vaccines, et cetera, et cetera. We had a major problem with supply chain. We had massive delays on project initiations, because I would tell people, I said, listen, you can have all the parts to build a car, but if that one washer is missing, you can't do anything. And that one washer can be a 1-cent piece that is putting on hold a $30,000 car. And this is what we see with CDMO. All of a sudden there's a demand for certain types of filter. It's not an expensive filter, but if you can't get the filter, you can't do the process.
Yep.
So the supply of these components became very critical, where often the CDMO would work with the client to find ways to accelerate getting raw materials and consumables. This was an area, for instance, where the big CDMO had a lot of muscle, right? Because as a big CDMO, I have a lot of demand for a lot of product, and therefore suppliers had a almost a preferential relationship with the big CDMOs rather than with the small CDMO. And often we saw a collaboration between smaller CDMOs, talking to each other, saying, I know we're competitors, but we all have these different projects. If you have this particular filter, can I buy it from you? And then my filter is coming in this time, and so there was a lot of collaboration between the competitor CDMOs, which was very nice to see, actually. And so now we're at the tailwinds of this COVID. I believe last year we had a serious problem in terms of all the projects that are getting funded. There's a ton of projects that are out there that are looking for funding. We had a lot of CDMOs that are building capacity, expanding capacities. We have new CDMOs that are opening up doors. And all of a sudden, everybody's starting to look for new clients. So I do believe that this year we're going to have an upswing on that. I do believe that the venture side is a lot smarter in terms of how they're spending the money. Mm-hmm. They're being very diligent in terms of the companies that they're putting the money for and so forth. And the service providers, I believe, are more willing to take on certain projects to help fill the capacity. So I'm an eternal optimist. So my glass is never even half full. I mean, it's even if it's a drop, there's a lot in it, right? Yep. So I mean, so that's how I see this industry. The growth of the industry is still at a low 2-digit CAGR. So I mean, there's a lot going on.
We're running short of time, but I'd like to just quickly squeeze in a last question about your CDMO advisor side of your business. What's happening there, Bernardo?
Yeah, so with CDMO Advisor, the idea behind CDMO Advisor is to link a user with a service provider, right? So the user has a project, a vanilla map, and they're looking for a CDMO that can help them bring that, say, to clinic from drug substance or drug product, or maybe just do development. The idea behind it is, as a user, you log in and you start clicking on what are the different requirements for your project. And then you search our database, and our database then spits out all of the CDMOs that fit that category from 100% down to maybe 20%, doesn't matter. But then it provides a link, hyperlink, to CDMOs that are part of our platform. And the idea behind it is because our user behavior tells us that you're more willing to click a hyperlink to an email address to Bernardo than you are to figure out where does Bernardo work and what is his email address. Yep. So we leverage that user behavior. We're currently on a beta side, which means we're still developing the software. Our intent is that by DCAT, we have all the beta sites already launched, and that by Bio, we will have the company fully active and launched as an independent company. And the best part of it, it's free to the user, so they don't have to pay anything for it. We have the service provider pay for it.
Bernardo, pleasure speaking to you today. Thank you for your time.
Same here. It was great talking to you. Take care.
Thanks again to Bernardo Estupiñán for the insightful conversation. As mentioned earlier, Bernardo will be joining us at CDMO Live in June for an expert talk about tech transfers. Find out more about CDMO Live by heading to pharmasource.global/events. Thank you for listening.